To go from an empty field with nothing but grass to a food-producing garden is something that I think anyone can be proud of. To harvest that first lettuce or that first courgette and actually eat it the same day during dinner is something magical. Plant that first seed, even if it's just in a pot inside your home. Watch it grow and watch it produce some fruit or become a vegetable that you can eat. And then experience that satisfaction of eating your own homegrown food. So it's December and it's been a little over a year that I started my garden. The growing season is almost over, and so it's time to summarize. And I will also tally everything up and see what the score is. In other words, how much did my first year cost me and how much did I earn? But before we get into that, let's go over a few things that went well this year and that I'm happy with. First is some of the things that proved to be a challenge or that I struggled with. I always like to start with the bad things, or in this case, the challenges, so that I can end on a positive note. Now, for anyone who has been following this channel for any amount of time, as you've guessed, the vole has been one of the main struggles this year. So I have been sharing my food with the vole very much so. It started this season off with the pea plants, as you might remember. The peas were actually one of the first plants that I've sown in this garden, and I haven't tasted any one of them because the vole picked the plants out one by one, and it nibbled on the entire plant or the roots before I could even grow a single flower. So yeah, the vole has been the main nemesis of this garden, but I guess that I'm not the only one struggling with rodents that nibble on our food. I've tried out several things to ward it off or to scare it away, such as the windmills that I've placed everywhere. So the idea behind the windmills is that when they start turning, they give off vibrations through the ground, and that might actually disturb the vole or the communication of the voles. I guess it didn't really work that well. One of the other things that I tried was placing garlic in the several growing beds that I have, and the idea behind that was that the garlic gives off a certain smell that the vole doesn't like. So the vole didn't eat the garlic, but it still nibbled on all the other veggies around it. So yeah, it didn't really work. Next year, what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to lift up all of my grow beds and actually line them with a finer mesh, like not chicken wire, but the finer, I guess, bird mesh or whatever you call it, so that it at least cannot get into the garden beds from below. It can still, of course, get into the garden beds from above, but hey, you know, I have to try something. Now, a minor thing, not much of a problem, but just something that I can learn from, is that the A-frame that I placed in the bean bed acted as a big sail, especially during some of the summer storms that we had. And so it started to lean and topple over to one side. Because the A-frame was leaning more and more and more to one side, I had to support it with some extra sticks. Now, again, it wasn't a problem. It didn't really topple over like fully. But I think next year I will probably replace it with either 1 or 2 TP trellises, probably on the same place, because I found that the TP trellises were a lot more sturdier and a lot more resilient to wind and other weather conditions. Speaking about weather, the weather is of course something you can't control. That being said, this year has been extremely humid and wet, and there were a lot of times that I wanted to go out and shoot some videos, and I just couldn't because it was pouring out of the skies. Not only that, but it also meant that diseases such as powdery mildew as well as blight took a hold a lot easier and a lot quicker than I expected. Now, on that note, that brings me to the least successful crop of the year, which has been my tomatoes. Now, the tomatoes have been struck by blight very hard this year, and that's partially due to the fact that I haven't covered them, so they weren't protected against the rain, but also because of the humid weather. The blight and the powdery mildew, they just rampaged through both the tomatoes as well as the pumpkins. So yeah, the tomato harvest was pretty much non-existent, and hopefully next year I'll be having a greenhouse, and then I'll try growing the tomatoes inside of the greenhouse. Now, one of the more neutral things that proved to be a challenge was just time. I am allowed between sunrise and sunset during the day. Now, of course, during summer that is no problem, but now, since it's December, that is a little bit more tricky because I still have a 33-hour work week, and that means that often during daytime I'm not able to shoot. So I just have to work with the time that I have. Now, onto some more positive things and things that went well during my first year of gardening. Before I even started the garden, I made a garden plan, and I had an idea, I had a vision of how I wanted this space to look like. And so making a garden plan before I even, planted that first seed really helped me out. And so yeah, the garden really kind of turned out the way I envisioned it. You can make it as elaborate as you want, and a little bit more on that later. But yeah, I must say that I'm happy with how it looks. And again, I do encourage everybody to make somewhat of a garden plan, even if it's a simple one, before you start a new garden. Another thing that I'm very happy with is my own compost. One of the first things that I did when I started this garden was to create my own compost heap that I later upgraded to a dedicated compost pile or a compost bin. And I, again, do encourage everybody that starts a garden to at least start off with making a simple compost heap, if you have the space for it, of course. There is never a bad time to start with composting, although I do believe that one of the more ideal times is actually now during autumn and maybe a little bit of winter, because there is a lot of free biomass available, such as leaves and grass and perhaps crops from other gardeners if you're gardening at a community lot or a community garden. Right now leaves are abundant, and so you can go out and collect them yourselves as well. While it might take time for biomass to fully break down into usable compost, I actually have been able to use my own compost this year on my grow beds. And once you have a dedicated compost setup, it's an ongoing process as long as you feed it. And I think it's the quintessential idea of being and working in a circular environment. So yeah, having your own compost is, I think, a must if you are able to have a space. It saves you money, and it's one of the fundamental things I still think of gardening, having your own compost and using it in the garden. So for me, the overall journey of starting a garden as well as recording it and editing the videos has been quite an endeavor. At some points I even thought that I bit a lot more off than I can chew. It has been challenging at some times because I actually had two new hobbies. One is the garden itself, and the other thing is learning about video shooting, editing and uploading to YouTube. So it has been a big endeavor, a big challenge, but a nice one. I've learned a lot during this first year, so I take that as a very positive thing. So some projects in the garden I did have to postpone, such as, for example, creating a water catching system as well as making the greenhouse. But it was not my intention to rush anything, and to see the progress that both me and the garden made during that first year was a big motivator, and it was really one of the main goals. To go from an empty field with nothing but grass to a food-producing garden is something that I think anyone can be proud of. And so I am actually proud of the progress that I made, and I'm very happy. The last thing I wanted to touch upon before we go to the actual score is the fun that I had, as well as the fun of harvesting things. I had fun about learning about gardening. I had fun with planting that first seed, seeing it sprout and actually eventually producing food. And then of course, harvesting that food. To harvest that first lettuce or that first courgette and actually eat it the same day during dinner is something magical almost. And it's a unquantifiable amount of happiness that you can get and satisfaction. So for anyone who thinks about starting a garden, plant that first seed, even if it's just in a pot inside your home. Watch it grow and watch it produce some fruit or become a vegetable that you can eat, because the satisfaction that you can get and the happiness that you can get out of your own homegrown food is something I think a lot of people are missing out on. And again, I do encourage you to do that and then experience that satisfaction of eating your own homegrown food. Speaking about quantifying things, let's get to the point we've all been waiting for. What did my first year cost and what did I earn? Denoted in euros. A few disclaimers first. Did I expect to gain more than it would cost me in the first year? No, definitely not. But since my garden is supposed to be a long-term investment, I do expect the cost to go down relatively to my yield and what I earn over the years. Secondly, I compared my harvest to the prices of organic food in the supermarket, and I also took the prices of several supermarkets to form an average price so that it would be closest to the truth as possible. Now I have here this little harvest book. So what I did every time I harvested something from the garden, I would weigh it back at home and then I would write it down in this book, and then I would also note the price that it would have cost me had I bought it in the supermarket. So I won't go over all the different kinds of harvest that I had this year, but I just wanted to mention a few things that have been very either productive or surprising. One is actually the bean bed. Like a single bean plant can be super productive, and I had around I think 15 or 20 of them. So we had multiple kilograms of beans, and we were of course very happy and satisfied with that. Another one, I think I had around 40-ish pumpkins, and I'm a huge pumpkin fan. Not only because they are very nutritious, but they also store for a very long time. And so hopefully these will last us well into next year, because we really do enjoy our pumpkin soup and our fried pumpkin slices in the oven. Now the last thing I wanted to mention before we get into the final score are actually the oyster mushrooms that I've gotten as a surprise. I've bought some mushroom compost earlier this year just to enrich the grow beds. But of course, multiple flushes of mushrooms actually sprouted from those beds. And so we had some really nice meals out of them. But again, if I had bought them in the store, then it would have cost me like 45 to 50 euros. So that was a very pleasant surprise. Free mushrooms. So, what did my first year cost me? Ready? The costs were 765 euros.
No way!
Now, this might seem like an awful lot, especially as a beginning gardener, but don't freak out. The three things that were the highest in cost were first off my corner trellises and just the materials for them. The compost station, again, the materials, the roof that I've built and the poles, etc. And the third is not even here yet. I bought all the materials to buy a greenhouse, but I've kept postponing it because other things were higher on the priority list because I wanted to get going with the garden. And the greenhouse was a little bit lower on that list. So one of the goals for next year and before the season actually starts is to buy that greenhouse. But so yeah, those three big things in the garden have costed me like a lot. The greenhouse itself was half of the costs. And then the compost station and the corner trellises were I think around 140 to 140 euro each. So those three things combined make up most of this cost. Now, another thing that cost me quite something is just the amount of compost that I use. I think I bought for around 100 euros worth of compost. And now that I'm making my own, of course, I hope to reduce that amount for the coming years. Now, could I have made it a lot more cheaper? Yes, of course. I could have chosen not to build the trellises, not to build the compost station, and not to buy that greenhouse, and just sow in rows and buy a few seeds and buy a little bit of compost and be done with that. And you'll be done with 100 euros. But that is just not really my style. I had a vision with this garden. I wanted to add a lot of height to maximize my surface area that I could grow on and around. And if I look back at that first garden plan that I've made, it really looks kind of like it. So that being said, yes, it was a lot of money, but what it has yielded me in euros, so to speak, is 415 euros. Now, that is a return on investment just over 50%. And anybody who is in the stock market knows that a return on investment in 1 year's time of 50% is not bad. Now, I am not doing it for the gains, at least not only. I have started this garden to eat more healthy, to have fun, and to save some costs. And so by that account, I have to conclude that this first year in gardening has been a big success. So what's next? Well, as you can see, I have a lot of cleaning up to do. So these last plants of the year will go out of the beds and into the compost bin behind me. I've also made a dedicated garlic bed that I've sown 2 different kinds of garlic in. One is, I think, Spring Violet, and the other is Spring Bianco or Blanco, but I won't be harvesting them till next summer. And I will be probably focusing a little bit more on constructing things, so adding new pathways and maybe improving some grow beds, as well as start on the grow house. Now, before I wrap this video up, there is one more positive thing I wanted to mention. Ever since I started this YouTube channel, I've gained well over 400 subscribers, and that is a very big thing for me. So I wanted to thank each and every one of you for subscribing to my channel, and I hope I can make a lot more content for you to enjoy in the future. If you're watching this video and you haven't subscribed yet, then please help my channel grow by hitting that subscribe button. I'll be seeing you next time. Bye bye.